McQuestion, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers. Supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television. The Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study of Teaching and Self-Government. Hillcrest Foundation, founded by Mrs. W. W. Caruth. And Collin County Business Press, locally relevant, personally profitable.
Did you ever wonder whether the prescription drugs you pay so much for are really bargains, and even more importantly, whether they're safe? Well, many of us share your concern, especially since the Food and Drug Administration is supposed to be the regulator which assures that drugs are both safe and effective. Now, we tried our best to get the FDA and representatives from the pharmaceutical companies to appear on this program, but we're unsuccessful. So if I seem to be on their side sometimes, it's because I'm trying for some balance, because they aren't here to make their arguments. We do have two experts on the subject, though, and let's say hello to Dr. Charles Simone in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. Dr. Simone is a medical doctor, a medical oncologist, an immunologist, a radiation oncologist, and holds a Master of Medical Science. He's the founder of Simone Protective Cancer Center and the author of Cancer and Nutrition, a 10-point plan for prevention and cancer life extension. Dr. Simone, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much.
We have a copy of you. We just had a copy of your book up there, but we also have a copy of you off your website where you're actually speaking to the press club, the National Press Club. Tell us what you were doing there.
Well, that was in 2005, and we were looking at the issue of the relationship between pharmaceutical lobby and the medical science, the battle that took place then. One of the guests you have, Mr. Emord, was a leader against this whole issue, and he defeated the FDA 5 or 6 times, hands down. And this is a whole issue about how the lobby, pharmaceutical lobby, influences dramatically the FDA against the truth about what we see with drugs. And the turning point for me was when I saw cancer ravage my grandfather's mouth and jaw, and I did what I could, but I realized that I had to fix this problem by preventing and educating and researching. And that's when I turned my attention to nutrition and cancer, wrote the first book, and that's when I start looking into the battle between the pharmaceutical lobby and the medical science. And we found that we can actually do much more for the American people without all the pharmaceutical drugs that we're using. In fact, there's been a couple studies showing that you can go into a third world country with about 13 or 14 drugs, generic drugs, very inexpensive drugs, and run the entire country medically very successfully.
Wow. Well, you're a heretic, to say the least. We'll come back to you in a minute and hear how you got to that position. But you mentioned the person that we have here in the studio, and he is Jonathan Emord. He's practiced constitutional and administrative law in Washington, D.C. for 23 years. He's defeated, as you said, the FDA in federal court 6 times, which is more than any other attorney in America. He formerly served in the Reagan administration's Federal Communications Commission and was a vice president of the Cato Institute. He's the author of 3 books, including his latest, the one I have here, which is called The Rise of Tyranny: How Federal Agencies Abuse Power and Pose Risk to Your Life and Liberty. Jonathan, welcome from D.C.
Well, thank you.
You're here on a night when Obama is getting inaugurated on the 20th of January, 2009. One of the things that you say in this book, and one of the things you said to me when I met you last year, were these 2 things. You said, first of all, and I quote here, I think, you said that corruption in government is pervasive, and I know that you told me when we sat down at a Chinese restaurant in Falls Church, Virginia, that the Bush government was for sale. Explain yourself.
Well, the government, unfortunately, is a victim of what's known as industry capture. The industry that is supposed to be regulated by the independent regulatory commissions largely controls those commissions. And this is a characteristic of regulation over time. James Buchanan won the Nobel Prize for essentially the theory of exposing this reality. The Bush administration has essentially had no control over the growth of the bureaucracy and has allowed individuals who are the heads of the bureaucratic agencies to get away with allowing industry to take over those agencies. And the effect has been devastating. In the case of the drug industry, it's been absolutely horrific.
Well, I have a hard time arguing with that, simply because 15 years ago I did a major study on the origin of regulations. And what I found in my study was simply this: the regulators are there to help the industry that they are regulating. I think with what's happened in the last few months and the last few years, the SEC would be a poster child for that in the financial industry, wouldn't you say? As well as all the other regulators who supposedly were there to protect the consumer, but in fact were there to let silly stuff go on all the time. Now, I was shocked when you and I had dinner in D.C. last year, because I've always believed, and I'm just sitting here saying, well, surely of all the agencies in the government, the Food and Drug Administration must be the best, because, hey, it's food, it's drugs, it's something we take, it's something we eat. That's got to be working right. And you shot that idea down in spades. Tell us more.
Unfortunately, the Food and Drug Administration, the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, has time and time again knowingly allowed unsafe drugs to enter the American marketplace for anti-competitive reasons. That is, to protect the industry proponents of these drugs and ensure that their products get on the market, because otherwise they would suffer economic loss. And the effect has been really horrific. We all know the story of Vioxx. What many people don't know.
Let's talk about Vioxx. Let's put up graphic number 1 while you're talking about Vioxx.
What many people don't know about Vioxx is that before the drug was approved, FDA had information from Merck, the sponsor of the drug application, that the drug would increase the incidence of heart attack by many times. And here you have a painkiller, Vioxx, and you certainly wouldn't want to take a painkiller that increased your risk of heart attack. Then the FDA's own medical reviewers, in that case David Graham, who is the Associate Director of the Office of Drug Safety, had been clamoring against approval of this drug, bringing additional evidence to bear to say that this drug would increase the incidence of heart attack and stroke. And nonetheless, even though those objections were present, the FDA overruled, the Commissioner of the FDA overruled his science staff and put that drug into the market.
All right, well, let me stop you there for a second. What I hear is, look, it takes, well, the latest number that I saw, maybe it was a little bit more than this now, but the latest number I saw, it takes $802 million to get a drug approved, and it takes years to get through the process. And so the biggest argument I always hear is that the FDA is too tough on these drug companies, and they cause a lot of money to be spent on that, and that's why the drug companies have to charge these big fees, because of all the money they spend on research. And you're telling me that it's the other way around, that they let stuff in that shouldn't have been permitted?
Absolutely. If you look at the history of this, you look at the whistleblowers who have come from the FDA, the medical reviewers, going to Congress, they end up in a situation where they can't live with themselves because they have witnessed drugs that they know will harm people enter the American market. And how does this happen? How does this happen if a system is in place that is actually protecting the American public? As David Graham testified before Congress, before Senator Grassley's committee, he said the American public is virtually defenseless. And the reason is that when you are an FDA commissioner and you're selected for that position, you understand all too well that you'll be there for a period of time, and then after that, you're going to have to make your way in the world. And what better way to make your personal way in the world than favoring particular applicants for drugs who need those drugs in the market to profit, to get back the $860 million and make a lot more. And so what has happened over time, and there are numerous drugs that fall into